Hello everybody, it's 11 o'clock. My name is James Luckhurst. You're very welcome to join us at this webinar. I hope that the technology won't let us down. A few thumbs ups to make sure that you can see and hear would be most appreciated. Right, look, this webinar is from Project Edward in association with Slater and Gordon. And just to let you know, it's being recorded and we welcome your comment and question using the chat function, which is open for your use. So do make good use of that. The topic is Road Death, What is Justice?, which we hope offers an appropriate opportunity to navigate the complex intersection of law, safety and grief. In an era where mobility is so important, the tragic reality of road fatalities continues to challenge our society on multiple fronts. This webinar brings together a diverse audience of legal professionals, law enforcement officers, bereaved families, road safety experts, coroners and academics to explore the issues surrounding road deaths and the pursuit of justice. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll explore the web of legal, emotional and societal factors that come into play in the aftermath of a road fatality. Our distinguished panel of experts will discuss the latest developments in traffic law enforcement, the psychological impact on victims' families, advancements in road safety technology and the role of forensic investigation in determining blame. We aim to foster a dialogue that helps to bridge any gaps between those involved. By sharing insights, experiences and examples of good practice, we hope to contribute to the ongoing efforts to reduce road deaths, improve support for affected families and enhance the efficacy of our justice system. Your participation is crucial in shaping a future where our roads are safer and justice is served with compassion and precision. Now, this event is 95% live. We do have a couple of short video inserts, so please bear with me as I push a couple of buttons as well as perform the role of facilitator. We'll meet our panelists in a moment, but I just wanted to extend my appreciation to Professor Sally Kidd from the University of Leicester, who'll be with us to keep an eye on the comments and questions coming through, and Sally will drop in and provide some summaries for us during the course of this webinar. Also joining us will be the journalist and author Laura Laker and the emergency medical consultant Dr. Rob Torok. Each will give a brief presentation on their perspective and will invite questions and discussion from members of the panel. So it's high time you met them. Here they are, hopefully unmuted and visible, to introduce themselves in alphabetical order, starting with Lucy.
Thanks, James. My name is Lucy. I both work and volunteer for Road Peace, which is the national charity for road crash victims, and my brother was killed by a speeding driver 10 years ago.
Heath.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Excuse me, my name's John Heath. I'm the senior coroner for the area of North Yorkshire and York, and road traffic deaths obviously get reported to the coroner in the first instance, and what happens thereafter will be part of the discussion, I'm sure, today.
Chief Constable Joe Shiner.
Thank you. Chief Constable of Sussex and also the National Police Chiefs Council's lead for road safety.
Chris Spinks.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Chris Spinks. I am the Managing Director of Wescotec. We are a company that manufactures intelligent traffic safety systems. We are a long-time supporter of Project Edward, and I served 30 years in the police, finishing as a Chief Inspector, Head of Roads Policing and Firearms Operations for Norfolk and Suffolk, and as a result still have a real interest and passion for casualty reduction.
And Raymond Williams.
Good morning, Raymond. I was a serving officer with North Wales Police, last part of my career as an RPO background before the police in road safety and the bus and coach industry, but now work for Slater and Gordon, the lawyers, and my link, the bridge between police forces all over the UK and our company, ensuring the families get the best support from our specialist lawyers.
You're all very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to come to you each for 3 or 4 minutes in turn to get the conversation going. Lucy Harrison, then, briefly, for us explain your story?
Well, like so many other families, everything was completely normal. And then we got the dreaded knock at the door. My brother was walking home on the road that he lived on. He crossed on a crossing and was hit by a driver doing 93 miles an hour on a 40-mile-an-hour road. The driver fled the scene. He was driving his girlfriend's rental car, which he knew he wasn't insured to drive. He stopped about a third of a mile away and got her to phone the police and say that she'd been driving and she thought she may have hit an animal. He was eventually charged with causing death by dangerous driving and sentenced to 3 years and 3 months, which was extended to 4 years and 6 months at the Court of Appeal, and he got a 5-year driving ban. And obviously just completely devastated my family. It was just before Christmas, and life will never be the same.
Let's look at the points along that journey that you had to follow and where you feel that you were failed.
Initially, obviously, you're in complete shock, and we accepted as a family that a post-mortem would have to take place. But we were then very hung up on laying my brother to rest before Christmas. He'd been killed at the end of November, when we were told we'd have to wait for the defendant to consider a second post-mortem. And as a result, we couldn't actually hold his funeral until the middle of January. And I found that absolutely torturous. I thought it was an unnecessary additional suffering inflicted upon us. And I worked with another member of Road Peace, Elaine, to campaign against that. But it took an awful lot of time for us to get a meeting with the chief coroner and get a new guidance. That was just unnecessary, I think, and sadly inflicted on too many families. The police were great and they did a really good investigation, and we were quite, I don't want to say lucky, but lucky in that we did get to court and we were a family that ended up in a custodial sentence. But until the point that charges were pressed, we were not really kept updated. We often felt like we'd been forgotten. We obviously didn't understand the intricacies of road death investigation or how complex that would be. And so we needed more information, and we just felt incredibly kept in the dark for a long time. When we did get to court, our meetings with the CPS were often for like 5 or 10 minutes before a hearing. We didn't get any chance to really talk to them. And on the day of the sentencing, my father's victim personal statement was paraphrased incorrectly by the prosecutor. My brother cared for our other brother who has learning difficulties. And the prosecutor paraphrased that as looking after someone who'd suffered difficulties in life, which we thought made a completely different meaning. The judge also referred to having received 16 victim personal statements from our family, but 17 character references for the defendant, almost as though, oh, well, they've got one more than you. And we've been told to expect a kind of 7 or 8 year sentence, and came out with 3 years and 3 months, which I don't think any sentence really would have eased the pain, but it felt very disappointing. And then I think more widely, you know, since obviously we're a long time through the criminal justice process, but your grief remains with you. And I think that as somebody with a real interest in this, the focus is often so much on only sentencing, and actually there's so many points in the justice process that we need to talk about, and so much that leads to that. It's not only the custodial sentence, but it's the reform that's needed along the journey to that point, if you get to that point, because of course many people end up in an inquest instead.
Do you feel that justice was done, and if so, at what point was it done?
I think my family felt there was some justice after the sentencing. The police actually led on the fact that they felt it should be appealed as unduly lenient, and we went to the Court of Appeal. And when the sentence was increased, although it was a minor increase, it felt really important to us, and it felt to us like we'd gone as far as we could go. So that did give a sense of justice. And then kind of about 3 years later, I found that I had the strength to go and sit down with the police and look at the file in detail, and seeing the level of work that they put into that investigation gave me, I suppose, some comfort in that they had really worked as hard as they could to bring justice. But then, you know, as I alluded to, myself and my friend really campaigned around second post-mortems, and it took an awful long time for the chief coroner to actually respond to us. And when we finally got an answer and we finally got to meet with him, that felt like a sense of justice. But truthfully, you know, the fact that this driver now will be back on our roads most probably really concerns me. I wish there had been a lifetime ban. I think that was deserved. And I wish that, you know, we talked more about this, which is why this webinar is so great. But I don't know that there is real justice after a road death. But certainly we've made some changes in my brother's memory.
Lucy Harrison, thank you very much. We'll move to hear from John Heath, Senior Coroner for North Yorkshire and York. John, what percentage of your caseload involves fatal road traffic collisions?
Well, for 2023, I can tell you that 1.6% of our caseload was deaths relating to road traffic collisions, which amounted to 33 deaths in my area. So that's the level of road traffic collision deaths in North Yorkshire and York.
And how do you determine whether a full forensic post-mortem examination is necessary in a road traffic collision death?
Well, a forensic post-mortem is required when the investigation by the police identifies a potentially criminally culpable third party as being responsible for a death. The senior investigating officer will explain to the coroner their rationale for requiring a full forensic post-mortem, and a forensic post-mortem provides the best evidence to prove that a death in a road traffic collision was, to the criminal standard of proof, i.e. beyond reasonable doubt, a consequence of the collision. Equally, a forensic post-mortem may conclude a death was not due to the collision, and a forensic post-mortem is as relevant to a death that occurs at the scene of a collision or where a death occurs many months after the collision. So they're not always required. It's only required where there is some potentially criminal culpable third party involved, and that information is really, you know, we are guided by the investigating officer from the police in that regard.
As a coroner, then, what steps do you take to ensure that the inquest process addresses the needs of bereaved families?
Yeah, I mean, an inquest will not always result. It's not necessarily always going to be the case that an inquest will occur. An inquest will be opened in every road traffic collision death, but an inquest would be suspended, or the investigation by the coroner would be suspended if criminal proceedings are being considered or have started. If the criminal case then proceeds to a conclusion, then generally speaking, the inquest would be permanently suspended because the statutory questions that I would be seeking to get the answers to would have been answered in the Crown Court or the Magistrates' Court. But where there is culpability where any culpability has been discounted, then an inquest will proceed to a final hearing. And in this area, I can say that the Coroner Service work closely with and involved in the training of police family liaison officers. This assists the family liaison officers to be able to explain the inquest process to the families in advance of the hearing and manage expectation of the families, particularly in relation to what an inquest is about. And an inquest is really in understanding that it's not an adversarial court. The purpose of the inquest is not to establish blame, and that can be managed by the police family liaison officers through conversations with the Coroner Service. I have to say as well that the needs of bereaved families varies immensely. Some choose not to see any evidence in advance of the hearing, some choose not to attend the hearing at all, whereas others are very keen to attend and be actively involved in the process. I can say that in each case, careful liaison with the family in advance of the inquest will inform the inquest of the family's concerns and needs prior to the hearing, so the coroner understands the family's needs prior because of communication with the families. Relevant witnesses can be called to give evidence where required. Some families may be legally represented, but if not, the coroner will explain the process and assist in helping families get answers to relevant questions regarding how their relative came by their death. All attendees at the Coroner's Court are dealt with respect and dignity, and it's important to create a very non-confrontational atmosphere in court, particularly in a case where one of the deceased was responsible for the death of another. So you may well end up in a situation where you have an inquest involving families where one deceased was or would have been potentially criminally liable, and it's important that we address that. And one final point I would make is that coroners now have the option to conclude the inquest in writing, where the evidence is not contentious, and the result for the family in that case is the same, as they are very much involved in the process. They can see the evidence in advance, they can see what the coroner's thoughts are regarding the case, but it can alleviate any stress of attending court or a formal court hearing.
John Heath, thank you very much. I would like to come back to you to address specifically the issue of the prevention of future death reports, and hopefully there'll be time for that a little bit later. I'd like to move to Chief Constable Joe Shiner, the Roads Policing Portfolio holder for the National Police Chiefs Council. Chief Constable, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. In an ideal world, law and justice are supposed to be one and the same. What are the factors that get in the way of their alignment in the sphere that we're looking at today?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. And thank you for the invite onto what I think is a really, really important and very timely webinar as well. And like Lucy, I think most of you on here will know that my own family went through the grief of losing somebody on the roads. And so it's a really interesting place to be now, sort of responsible for making representations about perhaps what some of those outcomes should be. And in order to answer your question, I think we almost have to take it back to the beginning, don't we? That we would always want to prevent any kind of road death or serious injury in the first place. And therefore, whatever kind of justice we see is appropriate, in terms of aligning that, if you like, with the loss of loved ones, I think that justice always has to be looked at with how can we prevent other deaths in the future. And what I don't think that we do very well in this area, and there's a whole host of reasons that I'll come on to as to why we don't do that very well. I don't think that we practice preventative justice or punitive justice very well, and we must and need to get better at that. And what I mean by that is this. So I'm going to use an example. It was actually reported in the media yesterday on BBC News. It was from my force. It was on Saturday, and it was a driver driving a heavy goods vehicle, a full-on, proper long one, as I call them, heavy goods vehicle along the road. Fortunately, one of our units got behind it, noticed it was swerving over the road. It got stopped. And the driver, a professional driver, blew 5 times, this is in custody, 5 times over the legal limit for alcohol. And he was driving that HGV on the motorway at 60, 70 miles an hour. Now, when he went to court, and he'd been previously convicted several times of drink driving, and when he went to court, he got 3 months custodial and disqualified for 5 years. And the reason I use that example is because I think that is a pretty shocking sentence for someone who could have killed many, many people using that vehicle on those roads. He already had previous convictions for it. He should have known better. He was a professional driver, and yet that's the sentence he was given. And I think we need to be more ambitious about asking for lifetime disqualifications and for really amplifying the consequences of people's behaviour when they make the wrong choices to get behind the wheel, knowing full well, as he would have done, that that's what happened. So I use that example because what we're not doing is going right back to the beginning of this process and saying, how can we actually police 21st century roads when the legislation is 20th century legislation? So your question, in an ideal world, law and justice are supposed to be one and the same. I'm not sure they can be until we get the legislative requirements fit for purpose for policing the roads and the attitude of those that use them right.
Well, let's look at public opinion and the importance of public opinion in impacting sentencing then of culpable drivers involved in fatal crashes. How important is that? How do we kind of tap into that?
I think public opinion for policing is really important. I mean, we police by consent in this country. We represent our communities. And I know both from being the National League, but also obviously being a local chief constable, that the vast majority of road users are people who do take responsibility and are law-abiding. And I do think that they want to see those who use the roads irresponsibly and break the law properly held accountable. And this isn't a criticism at the judiciary. I promise it's really not. It's a criticism probably or highlighting the fact that we still don't recognise or acknowledge that 1,600 people a year die on our roads, that we don't acknowledge that tens of thousands of more are seriously injured and their lives are changed. And we don't acknowledge the real significance of those numbers like we do in other areas of law and in other areas of policing. So, and yet public opinion, I probably get more in my inbox around antisocial driving, dangerous driving, careless driving. And if you look at, if you like, some of the social media comments, accepting social media is what it is sometimes, but actually if you look at the social media comments underneath our reporting of that HGV example I just gave you, there is little doubt that hundreds and hundreds of people do not think that that sentence is just. And that's what I think we need to listen to.
Chief Constable Joe Shiner, thank you, and do stay with us. I'll move to Chris Spinks. You're very welcome to join us, Chris. You served 30 years in the police. What did that experience teach you about justice?
I think some of the points that the Chief Constable has made there are absolutely relevant and will continue to be a problem until people understand that it's not always somebody else that this happens to or happens by, and that actually you as a driver can commit an offence. It's not everybody else. And our whole mindset around driving is that it's a right, that, you know, people, it's a well-known fact that people think that they are the best driver in the world, and they don't see committing a driving offence, whether it be speeding or whether it be something way more up the scale around death by dangerous driving. They don't see that as a similar offence or even a crime. And those people would never ever consider smashing a window, going shoplifting or anything like that. But they don't see it as a problem if they're committing an offence. Oh, it's only speeding, you know, I'll do a speed awareness course, that'll be okay. Well, actually, it's only a speed awareness course because you were lucky and you didn't get involved in a collision when you were driving at that speed, which would then make it much more of a serious issue and much more of an offence. But it's still not put in the same light as an unlawful killing in terms of murder or manslaughter or assaults or all of those other offences against the person under the Road Traffic Act. It just seems to be something that we just take for granted, and those numbers are horrific, and they should not be the situation in the 21st century.
Chris Spinks, thank you very much. Now to Raymond Williams, formerly North Wales Police, now with Slater and Gordon. Raymond, we must remember that every family journey through the aftermath of a road crash is going to be different. In your experience, what are the challenges common to every family journey?
Well, first and foremost, James, thank you very much for all you're doing with Project Edward. I think it's a fantastic organisation and supported it from the police before, and now again through Slater and Gordon. But coming back to the question, I think it's the shock, isn't it? Because very few fatal traffic collisions are planned. You do get the odd suicidal ones now and again, but very rare. Is that shock and having that unexpected knock on the door by a uniformed police officer. And of course, that is the worst job for any police officer. I'm sure those who are joining us this morning share that same feeling. And then facing the reality that immediate answers sometimes aren't possible, because when you knock the door, you've obviously they get that terrible news that some tragic events have taken place and they've lost their loved one. They want immediate answers, and sometimes these answers do take a long while to come through. And they're dealing with their grief, trying to make sense of what happened, why this crash has resulted in the death of their loved one. And we've all over the country, we've got fantastic forensic collision investigators and brilliant police investigators who are able to piece together a lot of the scenes of what happened in the collisions. But sadly, some answers as to how the crash happened is taken to the grave by the individual that has died. Most of the families that FLOs deal with and the police come into contact with involving death on the road, it's normally their first ever interaction with the police. As Chris mentioned earlier, they're not the people that normally cause, damage and assaults people. It's just they've been, involved in this crash. But the common things with families is from the outset is to manage their expectations when you turn up and dealing with them, and keep in touch with them and clearly explain to them that things do take time. And from my experience, my personal experience dealing with so many families over the sort of last 20 years, is that they may nod and they may say yes, but sometimes what you tell them goes in through one ear and out through the other, because they're dealing with it, the shock and the grief. And again, before I finish, I think the main thing for me on this aspect is that the LAO and the Family Liaison Coordinator appoints the most suitable FLO for each deployment. I think in the past, LAOs and FLTs tend to just go off a list of who's available. But I think they need to sort of bear things in mind, like who's the best one for this particular deployment, looking at language issues, especially in Wales, where I'm from, where the majority of people in the West of North Wales Police area, their first language, Welsh speakers. So that's important that the FLO, that the best suited FLO for that deployment.
Williams, thank you. Stay with us. We'll come back to you, but I think the time has come now for to hopefully connect with Professor Sally Kidd and give us a summary of what's been going on into the chat box. Sally, over to you.
Thank you, James. I might start from the bottom and move up, so people are both reacting to what's being said by the speakers, but also making quite distinct points as well. And that point about sentencing and also the way that driving is seen by society, it seems as a right rather than a privilege. It is a privilege, has been raised in the chat. Also, so Richard raised that point. And the question mark over whether dangerous drivers are prosecuted often enough, and the idea that penalties are low when they are, and not related to the damage caused. I know I'm reporting on what's said in the chat rather than necessarily. I don't know how much you want my views on this as well, James, but I think there is an issue here, particularly so something that Chris Milburn raises. There does seem to be this distinction between the public's view when they're seeing the sorts of stories that we do see in the media, and identifying that the punishment does not seem to be high enough. The example that the Chief Constable gave there about the HGV driver on the one hand, and then on the other hand claiming that when they're caught, that it's unjust that they should have to be penalised for what they're doing, and I'm assuming that would be, for example, those caught speeding and that kind of thing. So there is that dichotomy, I think. The psychologist Gemma Briggs, I watched something that she responded to recently, that there's that's seen by psychologists, that this, as somebody else had mentioned, we all see ourselves as better drivers than average, and that just can't be true. But there seems to be this view that the rules of the road apply to other drivers because they're not as good as me. I'm a good driver. I don't have to worry about the rules, what the rules say. So, yeah, I think other than that, there's I think Becky Reynolds from Cycling UK has put 3 points in the chat. I don't know whether you want to come to them now. Those are all things that I don't think have been raised so far, and they're probably things that we'll want to discuss at some point. And I see there's other things coming up.
Sally, very briefly, if you want to just whiz through them, but we're under pressure for time.
Yes, I think the first one points to the point about driving being a privilege and not a right, and that's the application of exceptional hardship, and the fact that there's thousands of drivers on the roads that shouldn't be driving, given that they have more than 12 points on their license, and the need to look at that, what she describes as a loophole. Secondly, the issue that I know Road Peace have identified as well, the hit and run offence, only having a penalty of 6 months. So there seems to be an incentive there for drivers not to stay at the scene. And then a question that has been around since I started researching this area of law, which is whether there is a clear distinction between dangerous and careless driving, and whether we should revisit that distinction, because there's this view that drivers who drive dangerously get off and are guilty of careless driving instead.
Professor Sally Kidd, thank you. We'll come back to you before the end of the webinar. But now I'm very pleased to introduce Laura Laker, a journalist and author, who is here to talk to us about, in fact, there's in the chat here, there's Lucy Pepiat has just popped in something about road traffic collisions are accidents. Laura, you don't like that word. How does using the word accident impact public perceptions of road safety and driver accountability?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. The use of the word accident is thankfully largely eliminated in the professional sphere, but we do still see it cropping up in the news. And in 2021, I produced some guidelines for reporting on road collisions, and one of the things that that we came up with in the 10 guidelines was to stop using the word accident, and that's guideline number 1 or number 2. Below accuracy. So it's really important, and there has been some change in this in the last year. National Highways, the trunk roads body, said that it's going to phase out the word on its overhead gantries and on its signage and messaging, and I think some police forces have been able to get permission. Well, I know that some police forces have been able to get permission to change the signage from those blue signs you get beside the road that says police accident to police collision, which is great, because it all sort of feeds into this narrative that actually most road collisions are preventable, and that's why police talk about the fatal 5, because there are common and preventable causes for this. So yeah.
What evidence suggests that changing the language from accident to crash or collision can influence attitudes and policy decisions regarding road safety?
Yeah, well, we know that language shapes how we view the world, and actually quite subtle changes in language can have quite profound impacts on our perceptions. And for example, if we talk about who's involved in a collision, if you talk about a pedestrian was hit by a car or a cyclist was hit by a car, there's only one person in that equation, and that's the vulnerable road user who's been injured, and not the driver, and that has a quite substantial impact on how people perceive what's happened. And when you get rid of the driver from that description, you really start to remove them from the scene, and you feed into this problem, which Chief Constable and Chris talked about, was that we don't see this as a serious issue. We don't think that it's something that we could do when we're behind the wheel, but actually it really does have a big impact on how we perceive what's happening.
Chris, you've got your hand up. Chris Spinks, please, a question for Laura.
Yeah, hi Laura. Fully on board with you about the collision and accident thing. That's been a bugbear of mine for years, decades. I'm that old. I'd just like to know how you think journalists can better balance accurate reporting with sensitivity to victims and their families when describing road collisions in this time of grabbing headlines, sensationalism, 24-hour media, and getting as many likes as possible, etc., etc.
Yeah, there has been an undermining of journalism thanks to a lack of funding and the advertising models changing. But I mean, I think it's about kind of changing the culture, because the initial guidelines work that I did back in 2020, 2021 was about focusing on journalists and the media, and they're actually quite reluctant to change. Some of them you get on board. So a lot of the cycling websites that are very focused on vulnerable road users, they're very happy to change their language, and they understand why it's important to be balanced. But I think a lot of us have this perception that actually crashes happen, accidents happen, as people would say. And so it's about changing that, and that's why the latest piece of work I did was working with police to look at how police press releases could change, because a lot of the time it's just copied and pasted a news story from police press releases. Sometimes you'll get a junior reporter, they're not confident about the language, and so being able to change that professional language, and National Highways changing that that starts to then feed in. And I think it's worth sort of, you know, politely putting pressure, not on individual journalists, because journalists get enough, you know, pressure and abuse online, but, you know, about working with the media and helping them understand that actually, you know, this language isn't helpful. It doesn't accurately reflect what's happening. It's important to have context. Research shows that including context in a news story in terms of things like the fatal 5 and the role of speeding really helps people to understand by as much as 100%. It changes their view of or understanding of what's causing collisions and what the solutions are. So it's incredibly powerful. Just saying, you know, there were so many collisions or fatal collisions in this area within the last year. We know that speeding is a major factor, and this can have a really powerful effect on audiences. And I think that's one area that that journalists could be encouraged, you know, if this information could be available from professionals, easily accessible, you know, to start to paint this bigger picture. Yeah.
The Chief Constable's hand has gone up. Joe Shiner, please, your question to Laura.
Yeah, and I think it's as much of a comment about one of the comments that's been made in the sidebar around, and obviously policing's coming up a lot in this, absolutely right that it is. I just want to touch on why maybe road fatalities are not given, if you like, the same resourcing as murders or homicides or even GBHs. And interestingly, you know, when I meet with ministers, I try and make this point that as a chief, I am not held to account for the number of killed and seriously injured collisions that I have in my county. I am held to account for the numbers of homicides, of rapes, of violence against women and girls, of theft of pedal cycles, you name it. I'm held to account for that in my solve rates. But honestly, nobody politically holds me to account for the number of KSIs. And so I think when we talk about all of this, there is a systemic inability to recognise, if you like, the importance of those people who are killed on the roads as opposed to killed in other ways. I'm not sure that was a question to you, Laura, but I've just seen so much on the sidebar, and unfortunately it won't let me comment on that. And I think it links to some of the stuff that you've said. And just very quickly, James, there was a lot of comments on there about how we need to improve and increase the number of road policing resources. Absolutely, we do. We definitely do, but we won't enforce our way out of this. We need to get behind technology. We need to work with manufacturers. And importantly, as I think Sol put on there, a brilliant bit by Saul on there, that we've got to make sure that we have preventative measures that really do stop people from driving on the roads in the way of the fatal 5, if you like, as they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I know, Lucy, you've got some points. I will come back to you so you can address Laura, but may I now introduce Rob Torrock, who is a emergency medical consultant, and he has a few words to say for us in a brief presentation, and we'll have some questions after that. Rob, we know that you're very adept at sharing your screen, so over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think a lot of what I'm going to be saying is reflecting what's already been said in different ways. So yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to today and for your interest and involvement. So I'm Dr. Rob Torrock. I've been a consultant in emergency medicine for 20 years and worked half-time as a pre-hospital doctor for the last 13. Time is tight, so I'm going to whiz through this presentation. A fully referenced slide set is available via my email or Project Edward, or get in touch. So over the years, I've helped manage countless victims of RTCs on scene, en route to and within hospitals, and the injuries we and colleagues in all emergency services witness are brutal and truly horrific. Every patient I see from RTCs triggers a deep sense of frustration and sadness in me. They represent our failure as a society to prevent this ongoing pain and suffering, and this fuels my passion to help improve it. My involvement with No Excuse, Safe Drive and conferences has evolved the last 3 years, really focusing on trying to understand the national picture and evolving dynamics influencing road safety. There are many perspectives on justice. It often refers to individual criminal justice, the legal system. From a systems and population benefit context, I paraphrase social and distributive justice into the degree to which society achieves organisation of its systems to ensure that individuals have fair opportunities and get what they deserve. This includes preservation of life and protection from harm. And that protection element at the end captures avoiding the injustice of sentencing innocent victims of collisions to death or suffering. So what is the problem? How big is it? The problem is entirely man-made. We've engineered the vehicles and roads. We've organised the rules and laws around mobility on the roads. The way we've designed and applied it is killing and harming thousands of people every year. Over the past 10 years, 17,000 people killed, 250,000 seriously injured, living with the consequences. The financial costs are massive. While 0.3% of annual deaths may sound small, this affects not just the old and chronically unwell, it affects anyone and everyone, including the fit, young and innocent. Looking at historic trends, the UK has flatlined for the last 13 years. Over a decade, when new vehicles have vastly improved inbuilt safety features, the predicted reductions in KSI figures from those have not been seen. So other factors are counteracting and overriding them, driver behaviour and speed. Prevention is both complex and simple. The simplicity is the dominance of speed. Within any collision, kinetic energy, which relates directly to forces involved and so to the risk of death and severity of injury, is proportional to speed squared. That's magnified by the increased frequency of collisions at higher speed. The complexity involves the social, cultural and political dynamics around vehicles and questions of road safety, compounded by the incomplete and inaccurate data sets and conflicting information relating to RTC prevention. SopranoNet, one of the projects being led by colleagues in Wessex and Southampton, will significantly reduce some of the information gaps and improve cross-linking to other national data sets. It will be a powerful research tool and add depth and refinement. But even without this key message and priorities are already known, it's clear that more should have been done already and be being done. There are various models relating speed to injury and death, all show the significance of even small changes in speed. There's recently been a lot more emphasis on the harm caused by many drivers with small increase of speed, rather than the few with very excessive speeds. So pause to consider the effect of drivers choosing to travel at 27 miles an hour rather than 30. That 10% reduction in speed reduces fatalities by 33% and serious injuries by 26%. The difference in travel time is negligible. And this is what we know about drivers' choices in the UK. 44% choose to break the law in 30-mile-an-hour limits, 45% break the 70-mile-an-hour law on motorways. Speed-related factors were identified in over 56% of fatal collisions in 2023, and a survey of reasons drivers quoted for speeding shows both a disregard for limits and the influence of other drivers' speeds on them. We're delivering and accepting a technological system with human control whose most impactful factor, speed, is inadequately controlled. In an age when IT solutions are cheap and available, think of the apps on your phones, GPS, what modern cars do record, but isn't necessarily accessible to collision investigators. Our system is killing and injuring countless individual people. There's a lot of reference to the safe system approach, and yet the key variable within road safety, speed, is not being controlled. I'd argue that isn't a system at all. The impact and outcome of speeding and excess speed will continue to outweigh advances in the other spokes of the safe system approach until we eliminate it. So what would justice look like? It would look like Vision Zero, no avoidable road deaths or serious injuries. That would be lives saved, it would be injuries prevented, for victims, friends and family, suffering avoided. It would include a requirement to properly track and regulate speed and other factors as a condition for access to the benefits of road use. It would ensure the appropriate time and expertise invested in deep and rich analysis of incidents to identify both the individual and the cumulative lessons and opportunities for improvement, followed rapidly and proactively by the action and resources required, plus monitoring reviews to confirm they're effective as intended and prevent future tragedies. Sounds like the remit for Road Safety Investigation Branch to me. I know I've run out of time, so I'll leave it there and open up for questions.
I would like to ask you straight away, Rob, how can we encourage better Good Samaritan approaches? You know, people, normal folk like me, who chance upon a collision and perhaps we might be worried about interfering or trying to help because we might make things worse. I feel that, you know, highway code advice on first aid is inadequate. Do you have any thoughts on that? And is there something there that could immediately make a difference?
I think the biggest thing is cultural, isn't it? And our individual society, our background to just being human. So I think getting the message across that in any collision, any incident you come across, imagine it was you in that situation, what would you want someone to do? The human impact of just stepping forwards and saying, are you all right? Is there anything I can do to help? It's just absolutely massive. It's that compassionate element. if we add to that, there's been a lot of work around sort of extrication, and people are very worried about damaging C-spines and things like that post injuries, and say, oh, keep still and I mustn't move them. There's been a lot of work recently showing that in most instances, helping people out of a car, particularly if they can mobilise themselves, is not going to do them more harm than not doing that. So I can't kind of go into the deep medical side of that, but I think for bystanders and the general population, more encouragement to step forward, be human, and just assess a patient or a person as a human being, help them breathe, see what you can do to position them into a better, more comfortable position. Because if they're helping, they're not going to be doing themselves harm.
Rob Torrock, thank you very much. We will move on. Sally Kidd, if you're there, I think you've been probably quite busy in the last 15 minutes. Could you give us a 60-second summary of what you've been seeing?
Goodness. A lot of agreement with what Joe Shiner has been saying. There's a couple of PCs on there. I find some of what they say really interesting. So particularly the attitudes of officers outside the road policing units, and road death and roads policing not seen as something of value for a police officer to be doing, despite them being police officers themselves. And I think their point, I think one of those officers made the point that there doesn't seem to be CPS specialisms anymore, and that's something that I think I would agree with, that part of the issue here is that the CPS, underfunded as it is, in addition to the police, there doesn't seem to be the lawyers with the necessary expertise to be able to make really robust decisions, if you like, in some of these cases. As Joe said, there's some really good point there by somebody about the attitudes that we have to the underlying offences and the need to change approach and punish those underlying offences more, perhaps, to provide a deterrent, because people don't. The point is they're not recognising the risk that they're posing to other road users when they go out driving dangerously. So we need to tackle the underlying offences if we're to deter them doing that. So this was Sean, I think, made the point that we as a society need to change our attitudes to driving, and he made the comparison to the media attention on knife crime, for example, compared to road violence. There's been points made about victim blaming. Slightly interesting that somebody wasn't in agreement with what Laura was saying about the word accident and that accidents are accidents, and that semantics, and there was a response to that in the chat to explain that why that language is important, and we should be using the word crash or collision. And Donna makes the point that what we really need is a road death investigation branch, as the previous government had promised. So I think that's probably more than 60 seconds, but I probably haven't covered everything.
Thank you very much, Sally Kidd. I would like now to share with you a short video which comes from a gentleman called Duncan Wakes Miller, who is from Australia. I met Duncan last year. I will let him tell his story. Let me just get this sorted out. I'm not as fast as Rob at fingerwork. I hope you're all seeing that. I will play it now at less than 4 minutes.
My name is Duncan Wakes Miller. My son Barney was killed by a drunk driver. The police woke us in the middle of the night and said that our son was deceased. Road trauma is profoundly catastrophic. It's heart-wrenching. It's every parent's worst nightmare. And that's what happened to my family. The kids were next to me when the police walked into our kitchen. Everyone was woken up in the middle of the night. It was awful. The police treated it like an accident. They didn't even breathalyze the offender at the scene. It was only later that we discovered that his blood alcohol reading was off the scale. People treat road trauma like a traffic infringement, and we have to change the game. We endured 18 months of a court process where the whole judiciary let us down. They treated it like an infringement. They didn't even treat it like a lesser form of homicide. It was just a traffic infringement. My son was dead. The driver, who actually offended about 5 different ways that night, he didn't render assistance when my son was injured by the side of the road and died there. We've got to change the game. And changing the game is not just about language, changing it from accident. An accident is spilt milk at the table. A killing on the road when someone drives under the influence of drugs or alcohol or at high speed is a deliberate criminal act. And all the evidence points towards we can do lots of things with safe cars, we can change the rules, we can change regulations, we can have safety limits, and we can put this, that, and the other together. But all of those things are peripheral, really. We have to change the game. We have to change our thinking, not just about buffing around the edges, but changing the game and treating road crime in the same way that we treat domestic violence or knife crime or gun crime. A few years ago in Australia, we had a mass shooting, 35 people were killed. Within 6 months, the government had a national firearms agreement, and we changed the game, and Australia is now leading in the world in terms of gun laws, and we've had nothing like that since. Yet, every month, more than 35 people die on the roads, just in my state in New South Wales, in Australia alone. And yet the government's doing nothing. I think it's the same in other countries. So we've got to change the game. And changing the game is treating road crime as a social anathema. This total safety piece needs to start with a mindset change. And the mindset is that it's unacceptable to get into a weapon and drive it criminally, dangerously, endangering other people. We've got to change that. We can put all these other things together, but we've got to change that. We've got to change the mindset of everyone, our communities, our judiciary, our policymakers, everyone. And when we all get together and we think of it through that lens, then everything's going to get a lot easier to change. And that's what I'm trying to do. In New South Wales and Australia, I've set up the Road Trauma Support Group with some other families that have gone through this hell, who are continuing to go through this hell. And we won't let it go. We won't let it go until we change this mindset. Thank you. My name is
Miller. Sorry. That was Duncan. Thank you very much, Duncan. We don't have very much time left now. I'm going to do some summing up, and I'm anxious of getting to Lucy, but I will just go to Chris Spinks first, because I know you have to jump out a few minutes before the end. Chris, I'm reluctant to refer to any positives emerging from a road death, but explain David's story very briefly as maybe something that you could describe as a positive.
Thank you. 2013, tragic collision where a motorcyclist and came into conflict with a car on a crossroads. Standard didn't see him, but the difference in this one was that the rider was actually had a helmet cam and filmed his own demise. The guy was in his 30s. He wasn't a young motorcyclist that we normally expect to be involved in this sort of incident. The video was very harrowing to watch, but it was obvious to me that actually we should use it if we could to try and improve things in the road safety world. So I went with the family liaison officer to speak to his mother, who was amazing, retired nurse, totally got the situation. And the upshot of it all was that we were the first force in the UK to release a video of somebody actually filming their own death on the road. Millions of views on YouTube.
We can see a short clip of that now. Yeah. I hope you are seeing the screen. I will start the video. I would just say that there is a brutal end to it, so please be warned. Thank you.
The incident occurred when Holmes, travelling at approximately 97.
James, you can't see the video.
With a Renault vehicle.
Okay, just a second. I'm not very good at this. Sorry. Right, so if I share my screen, include sound, window. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah.
The incident occurred when Holmes, travelling at approximately 97 miles per hour, collided with a Renault vehicle that crossed his path.
The driver of the car, Benjamin Austin, admitted to not seeing Holmes and was later prosecuted. In an effort to raise awareness about road safety, Norfolk Police released a video of the crash, captured by a headcam attached to Holmes's helmet. This video was shared with the full support of Holmes's family and features an interview with his mother, Brenda. She spoke of her son's passion for motorbikes and hoped the footage would encourage drivers to be more cautious and considerate on the road.
Chris, we thank you very much for your participation. I know that you have no more time. Lucy, you've been patiently waiting. We don't have very much time. Please tell us, I think you have a question for Laura or any further observations, please.
It was just a point I wanted to make on crash, not accident. It's obviously important that the media change the language they use, but I think that actually needs to trickle down into wider society as well, because it affects the support that crash victims get, and it affects the way that they're supported by those around them, even their own family members, their GPs, etc. There's this view that you should get over it now. It's a normal death when it's not a normal death. It's very traumatic. And so I think it's about changing more than just the way journalists use language, but actually the way society as a whole views it. And I know that in the wake of my brother's death, so many people said to me, "I'm sorry about your brother's accident." And I was like, my brother has not had an accident, and it wasn't his, it was someone else that caused it. So I think that really needs to trickle down. And I just wanted to point quickly to a comment that Donna has put in the chat, which she's put, as families, we're not looking for vengeance, we're looking for lessons to be learnt. And I think that really sums it up.
Thank you very much, Lucy Harrison. Briefly to John Heath, a recent PACTS report showed that only around 3% of road fatalities lead to a coroner's prevention of future deaths report. Clear, consistent guidelines for when and how to produce these reports are called for, if for nothing else but to bring closure for families affected by road deaths. Is that achievable?
Well, thanks. Just for context, I know we're running out of time a little bit, but where an investigation by a coroner gives rise to a concern that future deaths will occur, and the coroner is of the opinion that action should be taken to reduce the risk of death, then the coroner must, and it is must, make a report to the person or persons the coroner believes has the power to take such action. Examples would be in my particular court, a dangerous junction, inadequately maintained road surface, a lack of warning signs, lines of sight being obstructed. However, I can say that in my area, and I'm guessing in most areas, the local authority highways department will inspect the scene of a fatal road traffic collision and prepare a report highlighting matters of concern, acknowledging their awareness of the concern and indicating what remedial work is required or has been done. And if that is the case, and the coroner is of the opinion that there does not therefore need to be a report, because the report would only be highlighting what's already been realised, then a report doesn't have to be made in those cases. In terms of a consistent approach, I can confirm that the legislation, the updated comprehensive chief coroner's guidance note in relation to the making of prevention of future deaths reports, and indeed the training given to all coroners features heavily on prevention of future deaths training as well. So there is some consistency, particularly in the last 2 years, that's been really brought home by the chief coroner's training regime as well.
Thank you very much. Let me just come to Joe Shiner finally before we get an update from Sally. We've identified many factors that prevent law and justice being one and the same. We've heard about how support for families can be enhanced. In your opinion, what needs to happen to enhance public trust and to promote behaviour change and individual accountability?
Thanks very much. A couple of people have touched on this. Rob repeated it a number of times in his presentation. We must all lobby for the Road Collision Investigation Branch or Road Safety Investigation Branch, whatever we want to call it, I care not, to be introduced by the current government. We need, similar to how policing operates with a gold, silver, bronze structure, We need a national road safety board where all of this can be brought together. We need nationally recognised common data where, again, we can have far more influence collectively to be able to understand what we can change in fast, slow and medium time. But that has to be coordinated through that road safety or road collision investigation branch. And frankly, until we get that national coordination opportunity, then I think all of us on this call are probably all doing our best to try to reduce the number of KSIs, but a lot of that effort is leaking out of the side because we haven't got that collegiate coordination.
Chief Constable Joe Shiner, thank you so much. Sally Kidd, one last 30-second roundup, please.
Okay, I apologise if I miss anybody out, and I'm likely to. So first request is can the slides be shared? There's some discussion in the chat about victim blaming. I think that's probably mainly the media, but also potentially through the courts process. And the idea, well, part of the problem being that the Road Traffic Act uses the word accident, and until we change the legislation, the using of the word accident, I think, is going to continue. That's one challenge that we might have, and I'm afraid I'm not able to look at the comments that have just come in. So thank you everybody for all your comments in the chat. They're really interesting and valuable. And thank you, James, for inviting me to have a go at collating them all.
Sally Kidd, thank you very much. So we conclude this webinar on road death, what is justice? We hope the insights shared today have contributed to a deeper collective understanding of this very complex issue. The perspectives from our panelists and guests have highlighted the critical need for continued collaboration. Thank you to them. Thank you very much to Slater and Gordon for their ongoing support. And thanks to you for your participation. We've explored the legal challenges, emotional impacts and technological advancements that shape our approach to road safety and justice. It's clear that progress requires a multifaceted strategy combining rigorous law enforcement, compassionate support for victims' families, innovative safety measures and thorough forensic practices. So whatever role you perform, whether it's crafting legislation, investigating incidents, supporting bereaved families, implementing safety measures, or conducting research, your role is crucial in our shared goal of reducing road deaths and ensuring justice is served. We hope we can work together not only to make our roads safer, but also to ensure our justice system is more responsive to the needs of all those affected by road tragedies. Thank you.